Today what I want to work with you on is going through the aims and research questions that I had, a bit more about the design, the participants, and also the incentives as well, because this was something that I was incredibly proud of, and you'll understand why a bit later on in the presentation. Going on to why I chose narrative analysis, and then finally ending with some of the findings and my first recommendation, and I hope you enjoy it. So, in terms of the aim of my thesis, I wanted to gain a bit more of a nuanced understanding of those that are first in the family to attend university, and specifically their mental health. And the way that I wanted to do that is through hearing their stories. Now, what brought about this research is when I was actually looking at putting a proposal together, I actually was looking at student mental health as a whole. But as I started diving into the research, what I saw was those that I guess in the pool of widening participation, there was a couple of specific populations that I thought at under research, and I specifically came across first in the family students. What I saw was that these are a specific population that are at risk of developing poor mental health. And in addition to that as well, what I saw is that they're more at risk of dropping out of university, which, as we know from I think it was Ailey Cage, his work on autistic students, and dropout experiences, that the trauma and the shame that can come from dropping out can be hugely negatively impacts almost like the next stage of life, and therefore I thought this was a really important group of students to look into. So what I wanted to do is kind of understand how they put their story together to help make sense of mental health. I wanted to understand a little bit more in terms of how they approach managing their mental health on a daily basis, whether that be, improving it, enhancing it, or even protecting it, looking after it from the onset of like depression and intermittent periods of ill health. And then finally, I wanted to take all the stories together and then turn them into recommendations that we can provide universities so we can modify and adapt policy and practice to essentially help these students reach their full potential. So these are my research questions that I've started off with, but as you know, with qualitative work, some research questions can emerge further down the line. So it's not surprising that, as I said just then, about that I wanted to understand a bit more of how they construct mental health through the stories. I wanted to understand what approaches first and family students choose to manage and look after the mental health. And additionally, I thought this was a really important question, that what additional support do first and family students want to manage their mental health from universities? And I thought that was really important because, again, if you look at the research, we're thinking about now we're moving to a place of co-production, and therefore students and staff working together to create interventions that work in practice. Because I appreciate that sometimes we look at the literature, we hear the stories, and then it might work. An idea might work in theory, but it might not work in practice, which is why it's incredibly valuable to include students on the journey. So how can this be achieved? So I chose a qualitative perspective to understand more and to answer the research questions. And particularly, I just want to focus on a couple of aspects of my design. The first of which is that I conducted a longitudinal study. So last academic year, I interviewed students in term 1, term 2, and term 3. And the reason why I chose a longitudinal approach is because I wanted to capture that holistic experiences of university. And I thought by just conducting one interview, I just thought that there'd be things that would be missed out, such as, there might be management approaches to mental health that students choose to have in before exams, when they go home for Christmas, and so on and so forth. And then also a little bit more about visual methods. So again, when I was putting together the study, what I was thinking about is interviews alone can be inherently limited. And that's because sometimes when we're explaining our experiences, it can be really difficult to do. And sometimes language alone doesn't give us that opportunity to express what we really feel and think about a given situation. And so what I did was I spoke with my participants and said that they're allowed to bring props to the interview, and that could include photos, it can include video diaries, written diaries, or drawings. And what was really interesting is that students, um, I remember my very first interview, and a student brought three pictures, one of which were they were crying. The next was one when they looked okay. And then the third one was when they was out running and they were happy. And what was amazing, because this was the first time I've used visual methods, and it was incredibly insightful to hear a student use these props, use the photo, and really discuss their narrative, their experiences, and how it made sense to them. And again, for those that aren't familiar with visual methods, again, I'm a very honest and transparent person. If it was me doing the interview, what I'd show you, you may be able to see this. So this is a Polaroid picture. This is probably one of the very first pictures that was ever taken of me in the hospital, and it has my entire family on. And to be honest with you, that goes everywhere with me when I'm doing important things, which is why it's here on this presentation. So you can even see by that just brief snippet how the visual methods can be used to really get into experiences and explore. So participants and incentives. So as you can see, I had 15 participants, 12 who were female and 3 that were male. And from the actual research, what it suggested was that first in the family students tended to be from our mature students. And actually it was saying that around typically the 25 and over, which is why I tried to recruit as close to that and over that as possible, which as you can see, I was 0.1 off the mean age of being 25. Not only that, but what I also did was I recruited students from each year of study. And the reason behind that is because I was very aware of, for instance, like the University Mental Health Charter, the way that it talks about actually the focus should be equally on all years of study, and that in all years of study that we come to understand a little bit more of different management techniques, etc. And that kind of leads me in terms of recruitment and incentives, because what was really interesting about this is when I was designing the study, a lot of people spoke to me about the concern of dropout. They was like, do you know what? I think they looked at it and thought longitudinal study interviews, it's going to take a lot of time from participants, and that actually you're probably going to have a high dropout rate. Now, for those that are aware of narrative analysis, they know that how in depth you get into a case, and actually sometimes it's nice to have fewer participants to really get into an individual case, because it does take quite a period of time to analyze, which is why I chose 15 participants. But yeah, it was really interesting because I had an advisory board where I spoke to a couple of students to get their thoughts on how to conduct the study. And what I spoke about incentives, and I remember students saying, do you know what? I won't do this study for a £10 Amazon voucher. I would do it because I want to share my story. And that really touched me really, because I thought, okay, well, we'll give this a go. And I didn't offer any Amazon any vouchers or incentive of that kind. For NTU University, we have what's called SONA credit, so that for third year students, they can publicise their studies on this website and system that we have. But apart from that, that's all I used. And I was incredibly proud to say that 12 participants completed all of the interviews, and the 3 that dropped out, one was due to ineligibility, and that he found that his mum actually did go to university before the second interview. The second student dropped out due to ill health, and the third student was unable to attend the third interview due to how busy they were with work. So this was something that I was incredibly proud of. And I think the reason why so many students, I guess, remained as part of the study is because the way that I approached it is and I think this is really important for longitudinal research, I made sure that I conducted a briefing session with students to just talk a little bit more about the study, but also to talk about my motivations for the study and for them to really see me and why it's so important for why I want to conduct this research. And all the way through, like the end of each term, I sent an email out to students to say where we're up to with the study, the recommendation that I've published, I sent across to them, and I'm keeping them in the loop as the study progressed. And I think that actually helped towards the low dropout rate for this study. Next, now, why did I choose narrative analysis? So, of course, we've got in the realm of qualitative research, we've got a plethora of different approaches we can take. And the reason why I chose narrative analysis is because I just love the philosophy that underpinned it. I love the idea that, we've been telling stories for thousands of years, and actually this is how we communicate our experiences. And by doing that, that's how we're making sense of our own experiences of certain events or situations. And through that, as you can see, that the identity is formed by how we tell our story. And through that, we're able to understand the specific interactions that occur within an experience. Understanding how that within a mental health context at university, we're, understanding more how parents are involved, understanding more about tutors, our peers, what role they play in actually how we come to understand mental health. And then not only that, with the story, with narrative analysis, what we're able to do is move forward and move forth and go back between the past, present, and future. And what's really interesting is that, as I've said, I had a interview on and like term 1, term 2, term 3, and sometimes what I saw is that even as students progressed, let's say in the second interview, they may bring up a story they told in the first interview, but the story was never the same. And so there's different elements that can be added to the story. And so it's almost like students were rewriting their past based on their present, when that'll inform their future intentions. So as you can see, it was an amazing experience to really understand how we make sense of our experiences. So the preliminary findings, I want to just focus more on the role of family today. And I'm going to split this into 2 parts, one specifically focused on mental health and another focused on the perspective of university and how that plays a role with mental health. But as you can see here, when I was speaking to students, what I did see that mental health wasn't a thing, and that parents actually sometimes didn't really take mental health seriously. And what was one of, I had 39 to 40 interviews. And what was really interesting is this story always stood out for me, whereby the students explained that they went to doctors as they were struggling with the mental health, and the doctor actually said that actually they think the students may have ADHD, and therefore some further tests would be advisable, and here's some support that the students could have. But on the way home, in the car journey home, the parents actually said to the student that we're not going to access that support because I don't want a retarded daughter. And that always stuck with me because, again, the way the student felt and made sense of their experience was they just felt like a failure, like mental health is a bad thing. And furthermore, even with the same students, jokes were made at their expense. You can see here that, parents were saying when the student was struggling that, are you going to drop out again? Is it too difficult? And just made remarks to just make the students feel so low and feel ashamed of themselves. And moving on, another participant, when they were speaking about family, just referred to themselves as an oddball. And when we started getting into why that was, they told a story about how they were speaking to the grandparents, and the grandparent was like, "Oh, you've never been one that's done what we expected." Almost like you've stuck out. And when the students continued to explain a bit more about this, it was because the student's family is from a very working class family, and that instead of going to university or pursuing further education, it was more that they go and get a job. And although the mum, again, another character within the story, was like, she doesn't mean it, she's just having a bit of a day, gets a little comment, the students actually did say how much it affected them. And what was really surprising from my experience was how banter and making jokes were coming into the communication between students and their family. And therefore, this led to my recommendation. So my recommendation was that we should have a dedicated space for students, family and friends to discuss mental health at university open days. And the reason why I specifically chose University Open Days is because it's the start of the university journey. And what I've seen through looking through the literature, attending University Open Days myself, is that we think of University Open Days as this shine, it's almost this bright light being like, come to university, you're going to make your best friends for life, you're going to have the amazing time. And actually, it's almost like we're not giving students the full picture. And therefore, they're attending university with expectations that might not actually be completely accurate. And so I believe that actually to allow for students and their close contacts to have productive conversations, I thought actually face-to-face workshops would help. These face-to-face workshops could be run by both students and staff themselves. But the most important part of this is to have that authenticity because of how important this is. And when I started putting together this recommendation, I also started looking at university emergency protocols and the barriers that students feel when they're thinking about not wanting to notify close contact if they're in a crisis. And actually discussing mental health at university open days could also have a beneficial impact on students thinking that they can reach out for support and that universities are able to reach out. But not only that, we know that students, peer support and sense of belonging is incredibly important. And, let's face it, at university open days, who knows, these students may actually become friends if they decide to go to that university. And therefore, they're relying on each other for advice and help. We've got initiatives like Help Your Buddy and things like that. And overall, like the conversations is continuing to address the stigma around poor mental health that is ever present in our society, hence why we've got research groups, hence why the people who are watching this presentation today are doing fantastic work to address this stigma. So to sit back and to, I guess, think about why we're doing this research, why am I focusing on this recommendation? It's because I wanted this to be a catalyst for optimism. That sometimes that even though despite the challenges that students may face with their mental health, I strongly believe that students can prevail, be successful, and reach their full potential. And so that is my preliminary findings. and thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this today.